All right, so this is going to be an all-inclusive video showing you the 7 places that you may want to consider putting your money after you get paid. Now, most people can't get past step number 2, but if you follow along and implement all 7 of these different steps, then you could find yourself in a much better financial position than you were previously. And that is our primary goal on this channel, to help people grow financially, to help them save money and invest money and make more money so that they can build that better financial future. So if you're new here to the channel and you want to learn more, then definitely consider hitting that subscribe button and the bell notification icon so you don't miss videos like this one. So let's get started with this. Now, it's first important to understand, why is it that so many people who are making $50,000, $60,000, $70,000 per year or more, why is it that they're still struggling financially? Why is it that they're in large amounts of debt? Is it the economy pitted against them? Is there a massive wealth gap? Are we being taxed too much? What's the problem here? And while all of those different factors can have an effect on people's ability to pay their bills, what it really comes down to, the number one factor, is that most people don't understand how to manage their money. It's not taught in our schools. It's not taught by our parents in most cases, because some of our parents are in the same financial pit that other people may end up in, and their kids end up in it, and their grandkids end up in it. So it's essentially just a system that trickles down. And so hopefully we can provide some value right now in this video. So it actually turns out that about 40% of Americans can't afford to pay a $400 emergency expense. So $400 emergency expense, 40% of Americans can't afford to pay it because they're in such a financial hole at the moment in most of their lives that they're never able to dig out of that financial hole that they may be in. So hopefully we can provide some value here. Let's talk about the first place you want to consider putting your money once you get paid. All right, so the first place that we're talking about here is actually before you get paid. And so number 1 is your retirement fund. Now, if you're in America, about 65% of the viewers on this channel live in the United States. You could take advantage of something like a 401k plan that may be offered through your employer. Now, if you don't have 401k plans, there are other options as well. But taking money out before you even see your paycheck through something like a 401k could certainly help you build that future that you may be looking for. Because one of the worst things in the world, this has been quoted by many people, and I'm not sure how entirely true it is, but it definitely holds to some truth, and that is that the only thing worse than dying is running out of money before you die. Now, like I said, I would much rather be alive than dead, but still, at that, you want to think about the idea of running out of money before you die. It's certainly a depressing idea. It happens to people. It's really sad to see, and you don't want that to happen to you. So even if you're in your 20s right now and you think, well, I'm not going to retire for another 40 years, what's the point in saving for retirement? This is the perfect time to do that. So just putting away 5 to 15% of your money before you even see your paycheck into something like a 401k, especially if your employer is offering to match that opportunity, then that's something that you may want to consider. Now, just keep in mind that I'm not a financial advisor, and you need to understand that there are risks involved with any financial decision that you make. So any investment that you're going to make, there are going to be risks involved, and so you need to make your own financial decisions as to what you're going to do with this. But this is an idea that a lot of people do take advantage of, but sadly, some younger people, especially when they first start their jobs, they opt out of their 401k. They opt out of some of these pre-tax retirement funds that they can invest into, and they end up really hurting themselves over the long run. So this is the first thing you want to consider doing before you even get your paycheck. Set it up with your employer. If they don't offer that, there are other opportunities, especially if you live outside of the United States. Your government may have something pretty similar to a 401k plan, or something where you can get taxed before you actually get your paycheck, or that money goes before you actually get your paycheck into some type of retirement account or investment fund that you can get into. So let's talk about the next one here, which is after that money gets shaved off for your retirement fund. That is when it goes into our checking account. Now, this is going to be our hub for everything that happens, okay? So our paycheck goes into our checking account, and like I said earlier, this is as far as most people get. This is as far as 90% of the population gets. They get to their checking account, and then they pay their credit cards, they pay everything out of this, and that's essentially their savings. They don't have anything past that. But what I'm gonna show you here is that you're gonna have things coming out of your checking account into different areas, and this is what's really gonna be important. You're gonna have automatic withdrawals into various different areas, different bank accounts. So having just one bank account could be a mistake. You want to consider having multiple for multiple different types of situations. So this is step number 2, by putting it into your checking account, and this can be your hub for everything that you do. And this is important, okay? Now, for some people, they might not get automatic deposits into their account from their employer. So maybe you get paid in cash, or maybe you get an actual physical paycheck. Now, it's in a lot of cases going to be optimal to actually get money directly deposited into your account, because then you can automatically withdraw money, you can set it up, and you don't have to physically go to the bank and hand them a check and cash the check, or go in there with cash and try to deposit it into the bank. That just takes a lot of time, and in a lot of cases, it's just not worth it. It's better to just have it directly deposited into your account if you can set that up with your employer. Okay, let's talk about the next one here, which is going to be very important. But this is essentially paying for your necessities. Now, when I say necessities, we're talking about the bare bones necessities to keep you off the streets and to keep you alive. We're not talking about a TV. We're not talking about, if you want to buy an Xbox for your nephew for Christmas. We're not talking about anything along those lines. We're talking about the basic needs of people. We're talking about food, shelter, transportation, healthcare, and utilities. So not getting your electricity shut off, not getting your water shut off, and not getting evicted from your apartment. So this should be, depending on where you live and depending on how many kids you have, depending on your current situation, this shouldn't be an excessive amount of money. We're talking about the basics. We're talking about rent, utilities, and these basics here, okay? So paying those, very important to keep yourself alive, but nothing else past that at this step, okay? You need to understand your difference between needs and wants. Needs and wants, very important, and a lot of people can't decipher the difference between those two. So you want to consider, what do you need to stay alive and what do you want? Do you need to get McDonald's, or could you find a way to lower that expense for food? Now, healthcare is very important. Never skimp on healthcare. That's something that I think is something that people will skimp on. They'll skip health insurance. They'll skip going to the doctors because they want to save some money, but that could end up really hurting you in the long run. So understand your necessities, pay those necessities, but nothing else. Now, on top of this, you do want to consider paying those minimum payments as well on your cards. Now, we'll talk about that later on, but paying anything that's going to not affect your credit score. So if you are skipping on minimum payments for credit cards or things like student loans or mortgages, that's going to hurt you. We'll talk about that further on. But after your necessities, you could think about paying those minimum payments to avoid defaulting on loans. Okay, so let's talk about the next one here, which is going to be very important. And that's your emergency fund. Now, everybody should have an emergency fund, regardless of whether you have $1 million in your bank account or negative $100,000 to your name. Having an emergency fund is going to be one of the first steps to sort of alleviating some of that financial stress that you may have at the moment. So this is going to be a crucial step. Now, we put it at $2,500. This could be $500. It could be $1,000. It could be $10,000. Now, over time, it's nice to build this up. A great strategy for doing this is to just start by taking $10 out of every paycheck, or taking $20, $30, $40 out of every paycheck and putting it into a separate emergency fund that is very easily accessible. You want it to be accessible because this is for situations where it's a true emergency. Maybe you don't have any cash on you, but you need to get a tooth removed because you're in a lot of pain and you can't focus on anything else because you're in so much pain. That would be an emergency. Another emergency would be if your car breaks down and you have to use that car to get to work. That's an emergency, but nothing else. We're not talking about if you have to buy somebody a Christmas gift. We're not talking about if you just feel like going out to eat somewhere. We're not talking about vacations. This is strictly for emergencies and emergencies only. Now, you want this to be liquid and you want this to be easily accessible. So somewhere in maybe a separate checking account, maybe a separate savings account. A checking account would probably be the best option so you can easily access it very quickly. You could also consider doing it in cash, but I wouldn't consider having $2,500 cash laying around. But like I said, you can start with a smaller amount of money. Start with $500, $1,000, and then build it up over time. Especially if you have a family, maybe you want to consider getting this a little bit higher, maybe closer to $5,000. In case something happens, maybe you have to pay some medical expenses and you have that money on hand. And like I said, even if you're in debt, this is important to have because if you are at the $0 mark and you don't have an emergency fund, every time there's a little expense, you're going to have to start digging into more debt to pay off that expense. So just having this is going to be a big help. All right, so now we're looking at number 5, which is paying off your debt. Now, once you build that emergency fund, once you start to get a little bit on your feet here, you want to consider how you're going to actually pay off your debt. Now, there's multiple ways to do this, and depending on what type of person you are and depending on how much debt you have, there's really 2 different strategies for actually paying off your debt. Now, one of them is called the debt snowball method, and the other one is the debt avalanche method. Now, for a lot of people who are really struggling financially, they have large amounts of debt, and they're struggling to actually stay motivated to pay off this debt, then you may want to consider using the debt snowball method. So the debt snowball method, essentially what this is going to be, let's say that you have 5 different types of debt. Let's say you have a home mortgage, student loans, personal loan, maybe credit cards, and a car loan, right? So what you do with the debt snowball method is you're going to tackle the one that has the lowest balance. So let's say that your car loan only has $1,600 left on it. So you tackle that one first. Regardless of the interest rate, you tackle the lowest balance first. And then let's say that your personal loan has the second lowest amount, the second lowest balance left over on that loan. So then you tackle that one. And then you go down the list, tackling the one with the lowest amount of money that you owe, and then essentially eradicating those different types of debt until you start to have less and less types of debt, and then you have 2 types of debt, and then you have 1 type of debt. And it certainly is something that can make you feel better once you start eliminating those different types of debt, because when you're paying 5 or 6 or 7 different types of debt and paying all these different bills at the same time, it's definitely something that can really be difficult to stick with. But I want to caution you on something, because there's some people in my family, friends that I have, who will take on loans, maybe student loans, maybe car loans, maybe even a home mortgage, and at some point they can't pay them, or they don't want to pay them. And so what happens is they try to avoid it. And it's sort of like when you were in school and you had that school project that you knew was just creeping up in your head whenever you were doing something. Maybe you were at a party and you're just thinking about this project or this paper that you had to write. And it's just in the back of your mind at all times, creeping up on you because you know that you're procrastinating. People do that with loans, and they try to avoid these loans. Maybe they'll stop taking calls from debt collectors. Maybe they'll stop opening the mail knowing that they are past due on some of their different loans, and they defaulted on those loans, and they try to just not think about it. But that is one of the worst situations that you can put yourself in. You want to confront the situation, and once you confront that, you're going to feel so much better once you start eliminating different types of debt. Now, the debt avalanche method, mathematically, logically, makes more sense, is going to save you more money, but it depends on what type of person you are, and it depends on how much you can actually really focus on this without kind of losing some of that logic. So the debt avalanche method, same thing, where if we say we have 5 different types of debt, but instead of tackling the lowest balance debt first, you're going to tackle the highest interest rate from these different types of debt. So let's say that your credit card bills, you have $20,000 in credit card bills, but it's up here. It's a pretty large amount where you have maybe $1,600 in your car payment and something in your personal loans, but $20,000 from your credit card bills. Well, you tackle the highest interest rate, because credit cards are probably going to be the highest interest rate that you may have, close to about 20% or more in the APR for that. So that's a debt avalanche approach. You're doing the same thing, but you're tackling those high interest rates first and still eradicating one debt at a time, while at the same time paying the minimum payments for all these different types of debt. You don't want to default on them. You don't want to miss those minimum payments, because that's going to drastically hurt your credit score and end up costing you late payment fees, and it's really going to bite you in the butt there. So step number 6 is going to be what I would say probably the most enjoyable step of this entire process, and that is by saving up at least 4 to 8 months of payroll. So let me give you an example here. Now, I try to keep this closer to almost a year full of payroll, but let me give you a story here. So Bill Gates, when he started Microsoft, he found that he was struggling to please investors. He found that in some cases, investors would be putting a lot of pressure on him. So what he did is he saved up enough cash. He wanted enough cash in Microsoft so that he could pay all of his employees for an entire year. He had a year's payroll on hand in cash that he's able to pay all of his employees if the company wasn't making any money. Now, the reason for this is because he realized that there's going to be times where maybe they put out a product that is not as great as what they thought it would be, and maybe they're not pulling in as much money as they thought they would be, and they would still be able to pay their employees while doing this. So this is something that I learned about, and I realized that, look, if you have a job and you're taking that for granted right now because we have a really good economy at the moment, things can go south. Think about 10 years ago. Think about the recession that we had about 10 years ago and how many people were losing their jobs. Unemployment rate almost 10%, especially if you're an entrepreneur. If you're self-employed, then you have to understand that there might be times where things go south, where maybe your income drops pretty significantly. So having some money in your bank account, and not just a regular bank account where you're essentially losing money by putting it in a regular bank, but we're talking about something that's going to keep up with inflation. So I like to go with something like an online savings account. You can get them for over 2% interest on those, and that should essentially keep up with inflation. It's something that is very steady, and that's what I do like about this. Now, you don't want to put too much money into this in a lot of cases, and once again, you make your own financial decision, so you can choose to do this or to not do this. But there are times where people lose their jobs. There are times where people fall on hard times, and having this is going to give you such peace of mind, knowing that if you lose your job today, you can live off of this money for half a year before you even get a new job. So this is something that I like to do. And you can also consider putting money into a money market account or possibly CDs. I'm not a big fan of CDs because it locks your money in there for a certain length of time, but something that's keeping up with inflation, but is very steady. So you could also consider putting this into investments, maybe the stock market, bonds, but this is more steady and it's more predictable. So that's what I do prefer about this. Now let's talk about the last one here, which is going to be investing. Now, this is how you can truly get your money to work for you. For number 6, talking about money in that bank account that's netting you 2.5% interest, that's probably not going to make you rich. It's going to be a nice thing to hold on, but investing is going to potentially make you rich. So we're talking about real estate, stocks, bonds, other types of investments, possibly some riskier investments, possibly cryptocurrency, whatever you personally are into and whatever you personally are knowledgeable on, then that's something that you could consider doing. But this is something where you make your money work for you. Now, this is step number 7. There are a lot of steps before that that you want to consider doing. A lot of people ask, should I pay off my debt first or should I invest first? And you can do some of those hand in hand, especially if you have low interest debt. If you have student loans that are 4% or a home mortgage that's going to last you 30 years and it's at a 4 or 5% rate, then you could do that simultaneously while investing. But if you have large amounts of debt, say credit card debt, or you have debt that's going to be upwards of 9 or 10 or 11% interest on that debt, then you want to consider paying that off almost entirely before you actually start investing your money, because the average return of the market's about 7 to 10% per year. Obviously, it varies quite a lot, so you want to keep that in mind. But those are the steps there. Now, after these 7 steps, that is when you can take the money that you have left over and then spend it on travel, then spend it on vacations and TVs and different types of entertainment, but only after all 7 of those steps. You have to pay yourself first before you can start doing all these other things that you may want to do. And this is a problem that I think some people run into with money management. And this is why people who are making $80,000 per year are poor. It's why they're poor, because they're not taking these 7 steps, but instead all of their money comes into their checking account. They're not tracking it. They're not running a budget. They're not running themselves like a business. And they just spend most of it on entertainment and leisure and travel and all kinds of different things that are not necessities, and they end up really hurting themselves. So pay yourself first, invest money, and you might find yourself in a much better financial position for the rest of your life. Now, if you're having kind of an issue with actually saving money or getting to step number 7, because some people will only get to step number 3 or 4 or 5 and then have no money left over. They have no money to invest. They have no money to build up this payroll, maybe 6 months payroll, and they say, what do I do now? And what you can consider doing is picking up a side job, picking up a side hustle, finding a way to make some extra money in your free time to then take all of that money and invest it or put it into some type of 6 months payroll for yourself. So if you found any value in this video, thanks for watching. Share this with somebody who you think could find some use of this video. I really do appreciate all the support on this channel. So I'll see everybody next time, and I hope everyone has a wonderful day.